Hello, everyone.
Yes, hello everyone.
So, hello, everyone. This is, after a long pause in December and the holidays and the entirety of January, we're back with the fourth episode of Seen How Many, the show that has a title that we never actually explained, but in the next episode probably you will do. And we're here with Morgan from South Africa.
Yes, I'm currently in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, eager to carry on with my own project here. But for the meantime, it's time to talk about our previous projects.
Yes, which we will just after talking about what the actual platform that we do this for is and what it's for. So this is a podcast out of one of many of Near-Balkan, a platform that we have been developing for 2.5 years now. It has set the aim to encourage not only filmmakers from the Balkans and the Near Balkans, so the Eastern European region, but from around the world to submit their ideas for documentaries, for fiction, for animation, that are there are only ideas. There are only, I don't know, these small sparks that might formulate later on into entire screenplays, scripts, or scenarios that documentary or any kind of experimental film could develop into. The point of all of this and why we want ideas from all of you is not for us. It's not we want ideas for ourselves. It's we want to encourage you to share your ideas with each other, for the filmmakers all around the filmmaking industry and the art form and all the artisans and artists of the discipline, to start working collaboratively, to start competing on the front of the ideas, and to encourage a kind of competition where not only the final products, the end results can compete with each other, which are already very subjective. How you make thousands and thousands of decisions on a film set, and it all starts from the idea. Why not start competing with ideas already? Because there are many, many films made that have no story whatsoever, no dynamics, character dynamics, no story, no plot, and most importantly, no message. So if we are able to set up a competition, and I really hope it's going to work out, with amongst filmmakers competing with the messages behind their stories and the dynamics that they built upon them and the metaphors that they built layers and layers and layers above all that, then I hope we can build a foundation, a stronger foundation for better filmmaking, story-wise, message-wise, and incentivize quality filmmaking, I hope.
Yeah, but also creating a network where people can support each other's visions and help them get to a stage where they can compete on the stage of some sort.
Exactly. And so this competition is for money. This competition is for audiences. The main aim is that if you have an idea, you can already sell premiere tickets with that, because an idea can be presented as a teaser, as a trailer, and that's the only thing people have when they buy their tickets to go to see that film in the movies. So in the platform, we have as a realistic aim one film idea chosen, let that be animation, documentary, or live action fiction, every 2 months. And it's a constant competition, but we end a competition round every 2 months. And that one winner, that film, takes all the premiere tickets that the users of the site vote with. So everyone buys a premiere ticket for the winner that they don't know which movie is going to be, but they vote with their tickets to any of the entries, and they collectively are able to attend the premiere after a year of production for that short. These are short films, obviously not for the documentaries, but for the rest. For the documentaries, which are usually small budget anyway, they can be any length that can be done budget wise. And so the aim is to package all of these things that we produce in these cases, that we are able to film as short films, as proofs of concept, and to move these forward, to package them with an audience already interested in them for film financiers, for big studios and state subsidized filmmaking companies, and to actually make them like live action feature films, at least in that format, after all the attention has been brought to them. Yeah, but enough about Near-Balkan. Let's get into the podcast.
Yes. Well, as we talked about last time, we were doing lots of reflecting on ideation and idea formation for a possible plot, and this time we'll explore our different writing processes in the projects that we had together in Menet, France.
Yes, in the projects that we've been reminiscing about in the past 3 episodes, and we're continuing the filmmaking process as our spine, as our structure for the podcast. We've started with the ideation, with the finding of conflict for a story, for a short film. And then we went forward in the second episode it was about the conspiracy itself. So after you found the drama, how to identify the drama, how to brainstorm about the drama, how to find what you could talk about, how you find the underlying message of your future story. And
how you find your inspiration and the main conflict of a given situation, which of course
exactly
is your main message,
which is, as we talked about in the first 2 episodes, is the only thing that one does a story for. Yet most of the films and most of the stories presented lack that underlying message, lack that conflict, and filmmakers don't even think about having and finding these conflicts. So really important stuff. And in the previous episode, this third one, we talked about the modeling of a plot, character dynamics, and how their power relations and their behaviors can be mapped out and mapped on the timeline of the plot. And that's about it. And so we've gotten as far as the writing. How does the writing process actually built up? How is it going from just a concept, a mind map with all these lines connected amongst the characters, the motivations listed, the needs, the wants, and the metaphoric level, and the superficial want level, the communicated, the explicit level of the character, and how these can be combined, subtext, the keywords, how can that be applied. So this is today's topic: how does one write a script? And by the end of the episode, we should get to the table read, the occasion where, and this is very important from the start of a writing, where the actors are not brought through an audience, audition,
where you get to test your script, maybe.
Not only to test, but to persuade, to convince the actors to do and take the parts, to do the production, to do the film, to take part, and to spend days, weeks, if we're not talking about our projects in Menet, month, years with the same film, the same production. So it's a really huge task, a really huge take for them, and so it's as the stereotypical understanding of how one has to take an audition to get into a movie is only true for big studio productions. One might not actually think it's a difficulty to get the actors and to get all the crew to take on their positions and the tasks that come with participating, collaborating in a production like this. But this actually is the hardest part. If you don't have a crew, if you don't have a cast, you don't have a film, and anything else is way easier to get an equipment, to get even the funding for a production is easier than to get, to persuade, to convince your actors, your cast, your crew to spend the time of a production working, ideating, collaborating.
And so with this process of persuasion, what kinds of methods do you employ in your writing styles, especially for our very first project together, which was the cleverly named title "We Only Had the World View," which had to do with our kitchen war extravaganza.
Exactly. So the project was, and we talked about this project in particular in the previous episodes, was feminist revolution. The theme was feminist revolution, and we had like our biased understandings on how neoliberal, woke, politically correct approaches try to influence the not yet followers of the ideology with the sensitive approaches to minorities and to disadvantaged and discriminated groups, and how, for example, feminism is talked about and how it's educated upon, and how the feminist ideas, the liberal ideology is presented to those that are either not yet educated or deemed the problem, like the sexist, patriarchal regime and status quo. So this was presented as not as a right-wing critique. I tried to critique from the left. The problem is obviously not sensitivity and approaching a patriarchal society teaching sensitivity. The problem is the superficiality and the hypocrisy when there is, and usually there is, behind. And so we went to the project already with the understanding of what sexism is, of what patriarchal society is, of what the main problems are, and of course the sharing experiences about understanding each other's opinions, each other's backgrounds, and whether some have already experienced as victims the patriarchal status quo.
Yes. So, of course, in the background, of course, all of these things were in our minds. But where do you find a good balance between negotiating the superficial aspect of the narrative and the message?
Yes. So even though that was the original conflict and the like the message, the underlying message was the hypocrisy, and in a critique on the Rogerian method, so to say. Rogerian method is the way when they want to teach you sensitivity in a way that they really are vaguely, superficially encourage you in anything you say. When there are these people, the Rogerians, that like really want to convince you of being sensitive, of understanding and supporting victims, minorities. And so when they ask about your traumas, your problems, they support you explicitly in everything, in anything you say. And so this method in particular is really one of those elements that like delegitimize the actual like mission of fighting those using their powers like without any boundaries, without any consciousness on how and who they hurt. So my aim in particular in the production of a film was to present that, to present this entity, this method, this approach, this hypocrisy, because actually when someone is able to be in the position of a Rogerian listener, they are already in power. If they are the ones to listen to you, telling your traumas, exposing yourself, you hand the power to them, and they not listening to you, they not reacting to what you say, but just expressing superficial support, misuse, if not like intentionally wanting to hurt you, but misuse in a way that they like bagatelize anything you say and anything you present to the level of, yeah, that is, there are problems in the world and you're part of that and now you know, and not trying to like deal with specifics of traumas and specifics of social dynamics. That is basically against the cause of like sensitivity.
Well, of course, because you would be continually skirting around a topic without ever mentioning it or critiquing it in any way, because you're feigning your support.
Yeah, and so what you said before, finding like a subversion for all of that. I myself, and as we went through the writing process, we kind of like contacted each other and asked, brainstormed together at some point. I had a problem, I had a struggle on my workshop, which was writing a script and producing a movie afterwards. I started my workshop in the 3-week project on the 4th day, and it went like fine for a couple of days, and then when the topic kicked in and the safe space should have been built, or at least it was set to be built.
There was a foundation of a safe space mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, from that point on, the censoring, the comparison for any activity, any production, any workshop was compared to the quality of the imagined safe space. And so the safe space, and this is where I try to point to the hypocrisy, was not about like finding the similarities and the differences of the participating people, the ensemble, and trying to find like common understandings, building a common vocabulary, and having the safe space of not like applying critique on each other that's so harsh that this encourages them of exposing themselves, the participants, to each other. It was compared to an ideal. It was tried to be built at the safe space as we learned about it, as we heard in the news, as we read about it, how does a safe space look like? And so this is the worst thing you can do, because this compares the thing that you collectively build to your own like vague experience and understanding of something, and it will always be like put together by different understandings of all the people wanting to build that safe space, that ideal, of their differing views not even being recognized. So you build something together with different knowledges, with different approaches, thinking you build the same thing, but actually what you do is just comparing how others do it and how you do it, and comparing like, you understand how it should work, and then there are the others that are doing it wrong. This is the usual approach. When we do things, we critique, we compare, we like most of the time like treat our approach as the right one, and those that don't meet the requirements of our own, we critique them as the bad ones. This is not the problem. The problem is that with the concept, or any concept like a safe space, that is a dynamic applied for a collective, for a social group, you can't do it on an individual basis. You can't compare it to individual standards, because in the end you're going to discriminate on the participants of that group, because you're going to critique their approaches of building the thing. That thing in itself is a collective coexistence and not an individual like building.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose you could liken it to a living organism, or maybe a human body, where for a given task you'd need the head, and the head can suggest the proper way of functioning in a given activity. And I suppose we were all either trying to be heads, or no one was encouraged to take that spot solely by themselves.
Yeah, and so what happened was that our like workshop, where we brainstormed about how the story could be built, what plots we have, things that we like showed the structure for in the past episodes. These were compared to the safe space, but the creative process where where anything is allowed to be said, any concept is allowed to be presented, like this failed in comparison to an ideal like safe space idea that was built upon individual standards, because in the very superficial understanding of what a safe space is, you can't say anything that might be traumatizing or offensive to someone that had previous traumas in that topic, which you obviously don't know about. You have to discover, but to be a safe player, you shouldn't try to name things, to talk about things, to debate topics that might be hurtful. And that also means that you shouldn't discuss the problems and the hypocrisy of the very community that you're in. And so this is
Yeah.
what we do in a social process. This was the complete opposite of what was expected from us, but otherwise we couldn't have done a great story. And so
Yeah, well,
this
we
is
were
why, yep, go ahead.
caught in a catch-22 situation there, because the only way we managed to write anything at all is when we have something to write about. And more often than not, especially in a narrative situation, there needs to be moments of tension that we can, as writers, communicate about, and what certain flaws are in the characters we're portraying. And of course, if we're deriving our story from the current situation, we are always liable to offend someone, and expecting both a good production and no tears shed on either side might end up being an impossible bargain.
Yeah. So that's where subversion and finding a metaphor and allegory for all of what you want to say is really needed. Well, in any other case, it's needed because this is what makes your story immortal. This is what makes your story interesting. This is what gives character to it. So the writing process after finding the dynamics that we talked about in the last episode in between the characters and all that, the metaphor, finding and writing the metaphor and finding the wording for it, and giving the words to the characters and finding out how they talk and what approach to the other characters and to their own goals is in the explicit way, not only on a map, on a mind map, but in a form of speech, in a form of actions, in a form of looks, because we don't really discuss the looks of the characters when we do the mind mapping, not much at least of them. We don't know how they dress. We don't know how they tie their shoelaces. We don't know how they move. We don't know how they walk. We don't know how the mannerisms of how they talk. This is all coming together in the writing process. It's like looking at a sketch, looking at a draft, and finding the form, the shape that connects all the dots that the map shows you, that the sketch, the draft shows you. So connecting the dots is the hardest part because this requires the most creativity. Putting together like a controversial dilemma and a social dilemma and a scandal is one thing, but finding a form to it that is presented interesting, that is not just a lame reality presented realistically, naturalistically, but presented in a way that a creative team of creative decisions of color palettes and sound palettes and character mimics and gestures are selected. That's where an actual art product, an artwork is produced. And that's the aim. That's why we do all of this after all. Because if we only had stories, if we only had the problems, we'd be journalists. But we try to aim for more. And
Okay,
yeah.
and this place where you're aiming at, how do you know when you've found the right metaphor to make a story palatable?
Well, imagine, and now I try to like lure you into being and acting as a writer approaching it. So how would you want to present a story to me as a kid in primary school wanting to convince your classmate of starting a game with you in between classes and on a break? How do you convince your classmate, your friend, your bro to play, I don't know, card games with you? How do you convince them? What would be the aim?
That would be the aim. Well, you would have to say that it was some kind of entertainment or something that would add value to their lives in some way.
No. Why? It's way
Well, because
easier.
otherwise they wouldn't want to spend their time doing something that they wouldn't find at all amusing.
And this is exactly what the writer faces when writing the material. You would think to convince others, you have to write some fancy schmancy, complex, like long-term worthy material that is aesthetically great and worth it to read and brings you some pleasure. But no, actually, that's not what people are interested in. This is what, like coincidentally and paradoxically, what they find as narcissistic material, because everything you produce without any meaning and any value and any collateral behind is something that is only your fantasy without any reality. And so that, without the message even, that is not interesting to someone you deal with, you bargain with. And in that case, when you want to convince your schoolmate, your classmate to play card games with you, you have to be you have to play
Yes.
smaller. So how would you approach it if not this way?
Well, I mean, personally, I've never had a problem with encouraging card games in the space between classes, but I would need to say it would be a common interest. You'd find something common to begin the obscurity.
Yeah, it can be. And that's the best case, when you just have an idea to do something and the other would be keen to do it as well. And most of the time it works. But still, imagine that the other one, spending the break in between classes, would wanna would have other choices, a choice to play outside and playing football with other classmates, but you in particular want to play cards and want to convince that like potential future friend classmate to rather play cards with you, not going out to play football with the fancy guys. So stakes are there. What do you do?
Well, the stakes. There would have to be a way of explaining your passion for the card game or the narrative, as it were, which serves as a hook.
Okay. But what would that hook be? How? And we're really clear on the circumstances and the stakes. It's a card game in a break, and like time is limited. The break's gonna end, and you want to play, and you don't want to lose the other one. Hook. What could the hook be in this situation?
Not
You
too
don't have to
sure
change
about
the
that.
world in that one idea. It can be really like everyday thing.
Yes, well, I mean, so far as bargaining is concerned, this is this is a thing of which I would normally struggle with, and that's why I asked you.
Okay, fair.
Yes. Well, of course, I believe that when it comes down to entertaining people or getting them onto your perspective, you would need to show them what makes this piece of information important, or what sort of enhancement uh, they can see or perceive
Still
from.
not.
Yes.
Still wouldn't be convincing enough. The only thing I think, in my experience, works and persuading people to do everyday tasks and simple tasks and make these decisions when it comes to bargaining is suggestion. You have to
Suggestion.
suggest that there is something behind. There is something that they can get, that they can acquire, that they can achieve behind that would make them more wealthy, if in experience, whether in monetary terms or otherwise, that would make them more, but not telling them. It's not about describing these qualities, it's about suggesting there's something that they don't have. It can be information, even. It can be skill, it can be experience, it can be money, can be advantage, anything. And when in that situation, and let's close the scenario, when there is that break and you want to convince the friend not to go and play with the others, but to play with you, you have to incentivize playing with you. Why is it worth it? And you don't have to have a real value behind. You just have to suggest that there is something on either on the long run or just on the short run that they're gonna get and that they don't have. And that's it. And so when talking about stories, when you convince that other one to stay with you, when you do the suggestion, that's the writing itself. That's the form in which you speak, in which you approach the other one, in which you sell the idea. That's the story. That's the writing. This is how you write a script. You want to sell that idea. And this is the impossible task. Like I haven't even met a person in my life that achieved that, but there are films, there are books, there are novels, there are short stories that do achieve that quality. And that is the aim. For me, at least, that is the aim that one should achieve when it comes to selling ideas, selling concepts, telling stories, to find a way to suggest something behind that is interesting enough to keep on listening to the story, to stay in the company of the storyteller. Like imagine Forrest Gump on the bench sitting next to Forrest Gump telling the story. It is interesting because it is a character telling the story. It has a characteristic how the story is told, and Forrest Gump doesn't really have anything huge to say that would make you I know he's not trying to sell you things, telling about that the product's qualities. He's only explaining his own story, and yet you're invested because you are suggested to that there is something behind that explains
Because
why
you're
things
gaining
are.
something from the story.
Yeah, exactly. But what you're gaining is just more information you don't have. And for most of the films, it's info. You see something suggested. How is it suggested in the case of Forrest Gump? You see a traumatized character. You see a handicapped character. You see a character with certain characteristics, and you want to understand. And that is the suggestion part. Why and how is he made to be that way? How was he traumatized? How did he live as handicapped? Why does he talk the way he does? Why is he proud of the things he talks about? And that is basically the method of incentivizing listening
So
to a
you would
story.
you might say, in a word, mystery. You
Yeah,
find the biggest pull or hook to be in the ignorance.
exactly, exactly. And so when it comes to writing, no fancy schmancy thing matters. None. Every characteristic that you put in the story is serving this mystery, is serving the incentive that you give to your viewers, to your audience, to listen, to get invested in the story, to get hooked. And that's the hook that you said, that or pledge, as some say, something that lures the viewer in, the audience in, and rewards them when they get to the end of a story, rewarding them in a way, I think that releases the tension of waiting, of expecting that information to come. And I think that's the beauty, is the like simpleness of the simplicity of all of this. You only have to show a characteristic that suggests something behind that you want to acquire the information for. The time you waste, the effort you put into listening and trying to find out, when that's released, the tension's released, and you feel rewarded, you feel the dopamine. And that's the storytelling, and that's all that you do in the craft.
So that release of tension, you would compare to the climax of the story then.
Yeah, and not just compare, it is the climax. The release of the tension comes after the climax, the moment when the information is revealed. And it's not only information that is like intel, it's information, it's like the satisfaction of curiosity for someone's character. And that's enough. And when a character is motivated to fight some inner battle and clashes with the boundaries, with the opposition, with any obstacles that he has inside and outside, manifested outside, can be anything, then you feel rewarded, because you invested in watching and following that character, and the character helped himself, herself, and you feel rewarded that this characteristic was actually something that gave you something, a point of view, a perspective. I think that's
Yes.
the value of storytelling.
Yeah. Well, then we now know like the why of the writing. But as far as how is concerned, what kind of so you hinted at the Rogerian method.
Exactly.
So how specifically does that work?
So the
it's
Rogerian method is
not
not
about
something that has to
Yeah?
do with writing. That's the ideological tool, one of what they like pejoratively, negatively call vocism. So that's the subject of the story that we worked on for July 20. The metaphor was needed because everything was opposed. That was obviously like in a raw quality, talking about feminism and the Rogerian approach of pretending to be invested in others' traumas and others' dilemmas and others' problems, but actually just wanting to convince them of following your ideology rather than theirs, your approach rather than theirs. So this hypocrisy was to be like written about. The story had to be about this, but it was obvious that it cannot be told the way it appears, it exists. And so in the project, I struggle a lot finding the way, the metaphor, the allegory to talk about all of this. But then I didn't have to wait for long, because this method of wanting to convince others of your own ideology and to follow the same approaches and same beliefs came in different fields as well. Even though the topic was feminism, this peculiar nature came in the kitchen as well. And not only there, came in leadership, came in approach to decisions made on what workshops should be done and what should be cancelled, and you see from that only. The kitchen case was interesting, and that became the metaphor, the allegory. The why is the question. So what happened was, these participants, many of them who were just like so sure of their beliefs, they wanted to convince everyone. They were also like really, how should I say, specific on what they want to eat, and what kind of diet they want to keep, and what kind of individual way of eating they want to pursue. But in a project like this, there is a common like collective compromise, that we eat cheap, that we eat healthy, that we don't eat meat, and we keep as small a footprint as possible.
we were definitely trying to keep green as well. But I suppose that in such a kind of curated situation as bringing a big group of people and hosting them in some commune in France, maybe their expectations were elevated through the situation.
Yeah. And so this approach of the Rogerian method, when it's not about, but as a mannerism is kept, but it's not about spreading sensitivity and the approach of sensitivity and inclusivity towards victims, towards minorities, towards the discriminated, it reveals, it exposes its own hypocrisy. When it's about your individual needs and used against a collective or against other individuals, your understanding of, okay, I'm going to listen to what traumas you have just to convince you. I'm going to agree with everything you say just to be able to tell you what you do is not right, that you're not sensitive enough. Even the approach of telling someone in a different topic, in a different situation about sensitivity when it's not about sensitivity, faking the motive of convincing someone just for the sake of individually I know, overcoming them as a collective obstacle. That was the thing that just struck me. This Rogerian method
Yes.
of, oh yeah, I feel you, I understand. But you see, in some cases, you have to be like this and like that. You have to understand that there is this thing, basically gaslighting you on your own rationale on how things of your own should be done towards the collective, how you should produce to the collective. These are presented, these individual wants of others are presented to you as the genuine, the natural, the general, the expected understanding and approach to things, and your own approach is presented at the, whether you are for the collective or for your own individual benefit. If you're not for those individuals benefit, they present to their benefit to you as the genuine, the natural that you should follow. And so it was so funny to just observe how some people went about and were so sure and so confident in that things should be under control, that taboos should be set up. There are some topics that one shouldn't talk about. There are some rules and some standards that should be kept. And gradually, it was more and more and more individual needs and wants and benefits that they wanted to get, and they pushed it upon the community, onto the community.
And in
Yeah.
a certain way, that all ended up with a whole lot of alienation in that project, I think, where no one was really talking about the problem. Of course, that is kind of our main theme in most of our topics of conversation and our writing pieces, but somehow that superficial quality of their supposed agreement started to falter.
Yeah. And so enough about like general stuff. It was really fun to see that on a leaders meeting where there is an obvious hierarchy, there are leaders of teams. Some proposed that the chef, the kitchen staff even has to be taken for a walk, to be told that what they do, how they prepare the food, what they prepare as meals should not be prepared the way it is, and they should learn to do it another way. And it was planned, it was agreed upon by the leaders that it is the right way. They have to be enlightened how these things should be done. And I mean, yes, you can have disagreements with how a food is done. You can have collective decisions on how it should be changed. That's not the problem. The problem is the hypocrisy in a, a, a project with the aim of spreading the approach of spreading the approach of sensitivity itself, and understanding each other's points of view.
Yeah.
In that circumstance, you can't impose a certain understanding on others when you want to achieve a democratic horizontal environment. You can't, and that's the joke in itself.
Yeah, well, as you so often point out, there's lots of hypocrisy in most of these systems, especially in this case where they were trying to promote like a feminist ideal, which was all about regaining control from an oppressor, and they end up using the same maneuver as their supposed oppressors to enforce that their requests go.
Yeah. So I sat in the kitchen, in the canteen. There was a dinner, and only egg and mayonnaise and some bread was served.
Because of
And
course that was what had been asked for. They had wanted to take away all kinds of seasoning.
And yeah, so it's obviously a revenge. It's not just, okay, if you want to get rid of these and these and these ingredients, you get this. Obviously, that's irrational. But yeah, the ones, the individual ones, when added together as a composite, all of this, the meal of desire is reduced to egg and mayonnaise and some bread. But it was so symbolic of how a genuine response of character, and the revenge approach is usually a genuine response of character. It doesn't have to be right. It doesn't have to be like
Acceptable.
moral even.
Moral, yes.
It has to just come genuinely from the character. It has to be honest, and it was honest. And there was a symbolic situation where there was honesty from one point of view, and there was this hypocritic approach that wanted to disguise itself as the moral one, as the ethical one, and they clashed. And it was so obvious. And just sitting at that dinner and observing the reactions on that revenge, and how different people with different needs, with different backgrounds, some of them leaders, some of them doing the Rogerian, and some of them just not having to do anything with this debate, but still like imposed. The revenge was still imposed upon them. It was so fun. It was so fun, and I knew instantly that this is it. This is how the Rogerian
This was
method
what
should
you
be
needed
taught.
to write about.
Exactly. And this is how a film about the problems of the approaches of contemporary feminism came to be a film about
Food wars.
kitchen wars. Yeah.
Yes.
And
It's good, and of course you found that point of interest and point of maximal communication.
And so the difficult part is you have to give context for a new coming audience, to understand your point of view, especially if it's radical. In our case, it is radical. Having a critique on a movement, on an approach of a movement that is not general in itself. Not everyone is included. Not everyone is informed about what the aim, the approach, the goals of feminism is, and how they do that, and how they find you. It's very niche, even though it shouldn't be. And the problems in the approach are even more niche. And how you can present a niche inside a niche is a task in itself. And I don't think I managed to achieve that. I don't think I was able to present to an like uninformed audience the problem and the context at the same time. I think I only managed to write a satire for the people that already have experienced the problem. And I think this is where a writer should get to. I mean, not where I got to, but where you can explain the context to anyone that has no knowledge of what the context is, give a context, present the problem inside the context, and give a critique to that from a superposition, obviously, not from a character, not in a propagandistic way.
Yes, of course. Well, I believe that potentially that is just your style of writing at the moment. In order to, as you say, resolve tension, you end up leaning heavily on like a comedic setup in a way, which makes it difficult to get a whole lot of contextual cues, especially if everything's about driving tension home. It's difficult to find, especially in like a 15-minute movie, how to balance that correctly.
Yeah. Then we can talk about the second project where this balance was met even less. This aim didn't this like trial failed even more when I wrote a story about my own family and my own family dynamics, and I don't remember why and how this topic came about, but I had this in me. I wanted to expose the like unjust things that I felt in debates with my own family, and I wanted to make a satire on that. But at the same time, I kind of didn't choose to do a satire. I chose to do a drama without any moral, which is not a story at all. But at least I made an example, a case on what the majority of films look like. And I think that was an important experience still to have, although I'm sorry I did impose that on all the filmmakers that were part, but at least we had fun. I mean, in the process, it's not the thing. It's not the end result in these projects.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I for one definitely enjoyed the filmmaking process there. I feel like that instance when we were trying to formulate ideas and write scenes for a potential, we didn't have anything suitable for the theme. No ideas were arising which would have an emotional impact of any sort. So when you found a tension in your family that at least or at least showed water to be, which was our theme, showed water to be integral in some kind of ritual in a way, we had to go with it, and especially all the dramatics which ensued. Yeah, as you say, I believe that maybe not drama, but maybe like it's more of a tragedy that you are
Yeah,
showing.
yeah.
How everything kind of falls apart after someone's death.
Yeah, I present a story in the second project script about the death of my grandmother and how my mother and the three siblings as they were, their relationship falls apart, and how their dynamic of wounds that they offended each other through the years, through their lives together, but while the mother was alive they didn't show it, how these get to the surface and how they not only just mock each other but fight each other after my grandmother's death. And at the same time, I put myself as an observer of this conflict in the story, but as someone who is treated also unjust, but who's like mocking them all throughout. And so it was a complex story, and otherwise it would be, I mean, a great thing if it was talked about in a characteristic, allegoric way, but it wasn't. It was presented pure, but still, I want to talk about it as an example of bad screenwriting. Not because the characters weren't written well, not because the characters didn't have great lines or dialogue or something that can be remembered or something that is nice. No, because there was no moral underlying the story. There was no underlying message, and there was no context given whatsoever. The characters could be understood. Okay, the dynamics kind of, but you have no story to tell, because the story in the Orwellian sense that Orwell says in the Why He Writes essay is that you have to have something unjust that has to be revealed to others to make justice to those that are victimized. And in my case, yes, as a character in real life, I felt that my position was unjust, but the story didn't give any context of otherwise how I was, how this affected me differently, how this was. There was no ethical way presented in the story. Even there was no context given on compared to what is this unjust, and so
Well, perhaps
most of it.
yeah. Ooh, sorry, but yeah, perhaps it was a problem of focus. You know, the focal point maybe was too broad to have a singular moral that we emphasized, because in a way you could compare it to like first person narrative or a third person narrative, and we ended up writing kind of in the third person, whereas it could have done better as a more personalized perspective on the
uh,
situation.
I don't think that is the problem. I mean, it's a decision to be made, but then there are these epic stories of Soderbergh's Traffic. Don't really have anything in mind other than that. But the narrative films, most of them, like Birdman, and there's stories where there are like different character arcs, even 5, 6 of them simultaneously going intercut, like in series that you have all the characters going through the seasons and they have their own character arcs and they always overlap, and they have these intersections where they meet, where they fight and what's so. But you are invested in some of them, in more of them, in several of them, and so that becomes an epic story, but just by not following one single arc, but by comparing in parallel different arcs and forming a moral that is the combined moral, showing different parts of the same struggle. And then now I like excluded the kind of series where you just have that quantity of characters, but actually their struggle is not about some common moral. So I think like getting in the perspective of one single character and like exposing the story in a like personal point of view or from a personal point of view is just a decision of genre.
Well, perhaps, but as you said, we struggled with finding, in a way, the point of what we were showing. And as you said, your inspiration was the situation as it presented itself to you, and the injustice that you felt in the situation. However, the movie we ended up filming felt more of a set piece, a set piece
Yes.
of a situation, instead of a directed, well, this was a right thing or this was a wrong thing.
I mean, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, you're saying things that I don't especially agree with. Like, when you present something that's the right thing and that's the wrong thing, that's I think the way of propaganda. When you have a subjective position of I mean, you have to put the audience in a superposition. If you are a Michael Moore kind of propagandist who has their own vision, this guy makes documentaries as a very critical guy against like capitalism and the American way of democratizing everything, at least in narrative. And he goes against Bush, he goes against Obama, he goes against Trump in his movies, and discovers how they were hypocrites in their like campaign programs, and afterwards how they stole elections, how they deceived their own voters, their own represented country and the people. And so he is very direct. He puts a narration under the film, and you see him confronting these characters, you see him investigating and all that, and you hear his conclusions. That is pure propaganda. And I think you have to have a superposition for your audience when your main character, your protagonist, is biased like that. So they see the bias as a characteristic for the character, and they don't feel like they're driven through. Because otherwise, contemporary politics is all about revealing, not admitting that you're biased and what you're saying is biased. So basically, like producing propaganda, not admitting you're producing propaganda. So art and objective media, and I would, it doesn't have to be art and it doesn't have to be objective. If you want to produce something that lasts longer than just a present motive and a present like issues solution through a propagandistic persuasion, if you want it to be, if you want it to have a moral that will be a moral that people will use as something that they can feel, that they can attach to, then that has to be intersubjective, at least, if not objective. You have to show different points of views. You have to show the biases as characteristics and not as the right thing, and especially not as the moral of the story. So with that part, I don't agree, but I see what your point is, and I want to apply that to what I made as a mistake. And this is
I
just a
mean,
great set.
I wouldn't think that we're too opposed on that point. Actually, I just
Okay.
feel like maybe we struggle with finding agreeable terminology. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel, yeah, like it can be an intersubjective piece. But I feel like maybe in this instance we didn't manage to capture um, any point of view in its entirety, and maybe that was the a good critique of the film.
Yeah, there was no dramaturgy in the story. It was an observation of a situation, and it only had the dynamics. And so this is the exact thing that I find is a mistake in most of the films produced. And there is a great saying that I like quote every time of István Szabó, Hungarian film director, that there are two types of filmmaking. The one where you want to make a film, and the other where you want to tell a story. And the majority of films are just, I want to make a film. And it doesn't matter if I have a story, I want to make a film. And the main aim, the approach, the goal of a filmmaker is to do a film no matter what. So when they make decisions, they don't make them like, they don't compromise the filmmaking, they compromise the story. Whereas if the story you want to tell is the more important factor, you compromise the filmmaking, you compromise the aesthetic, and you make creative decisions that express the story more better. So there, when the filmmakers, for the sake of filmmaking, do films, they usually care about their art. They usually care about a film's way of being constructed as they learned it, as they understand it. Of course, like with huge blind spots, obviously. Like, nobody understands filmmaking or any craft objectively, but at least when they want to tell a story, the story is the thing that has the dramaturgy, that has the narrative behind, and that is a communication with your peer in the school who you want to convince to play with you. Otherwise, when you want to make a film, you are not talking to your peer in the school. You are narcissistically just talking about yourself to your peer, not convincing them at all to play the game you want to play. You're just taking their time. You're wasting their time of talking about something, presenting something with characteristics that have no like conversation with them. There are no conversation with them, that have no incentives for them to listen to it. They have no hooks for them to hang on to. They're not attached to anything you say because you invested all your energy and you made your decisions in favor of you producing something of your own. And so that's, I think, the main error of the main fault of this script. There was no telling of the story. It was only observed with character, with dialogue, with compositions, creative decisions made for, not for a story, and definitely not for telling it to someone. That's why you need to have a conflict. That's why you need to have an allegoric layer above the conflict when you make the conflict the subtext and when you present something characteristic to tell the story.
Of course, yeah, that makes a good amount of sense.
Yeah, and so closing the episode, we need to talk about how you convince the actors to participate in what you do, because we actually managed to convince them on both occasions, with a great story to tell, with great conflict, and without conflict. Both of the times, the actors decided to take part, and actually for the second one, it was double the time of filming and runtime, the effort, if not double the ensemble, but still the same quantity of people, lots of people involved, lots of effort and time put in it. And still, it wasn't about how great the story is or what the end result will be. Persuading these people is a different thing altogether.
Well, I mean, especially those people in the situation, I feel there was more to be said about the time crunch and feeling that there should be something that we have to show for all our time there. It was a big motivator for most of them, especially since no one else had really made a. Well, there was another attempt at a film that was happening in parallel. I think we managed to have lots of the equipment, so there was lots of faith in our ability to use the equipment, even if it was on a failing story.
Yes, so you presented the main motivation of wanting to do a film. Everybody wants to try how it is in a semi-professional or professional environment, to use filming equipment that looks professional, to try out the situations where you are doing scenes and takes, and everybody has their own task to do. Yes, this goes once for everyone, but otherwise, when you persuade actors, and actors most of the time are professional actors. They know how it is, and they don't only do it to experience it once. But then something else you pointed out, having the equipment to do things, and like having the monopoly for equipment is another thing. It's like having the funding for a film. Like many of the actors, and this is a major problem around the world, the actors and the filmmakers go after the resources, and most of the times the resources are in the hands of wealthy people who by default don't have the conflict and the money doesn't go together. And naturally, there has to be a talent, there has to be obviously a conflict and an approach to tell the conflict. And so, yeah, these things are yeah, but set them aside. If we want to convince an actor by material to take part in a project, why and how can we as writers incentivize them, convince them to take part, to take
Yes.
on a huge project and a huge effort?
Well, yeah. Well, of course, that is the table read, and I still wonder the same thing for that second project, because whenever we reflect on it as a group, it seems like everyone gets a bit bleary-eyed and confused as to how we even managed to make the film at all.
Which is naturally a good thing, because if something's pretentious, if something sets a goal that it seems unmanageable, then there is something that is of extraordinary like value, at least in the effort. And it has to be, when someone wants to tell a story, it has to be extraordinary, otherwise it won't be interesting. So when there's just a lame effort of, yeah, there is this, it's already set up, so we do it, it's not going to be great. So that's, I think, not necessarily a bad thing when most of the people to be lured into the project don't understand what it's about at all, I mean, altogether. But the table read is an important part of the entire process, because that's a collective experience. And just like when telling a story, hooking someone in, this occasion sells a hook, but not in a way that the story does, with just rising tension and then releasing it once and then letting you go, but by rewarding you, rewarding you with a knowledge, with an experience that only a certain closed group has. And I think that's another thing that a story has to have, an experience that you, as a privileged viewer, as an audience member, you and only you, the audience, ever growing, but still a closed group, has for that story, for that experience. And they will look at the world differently because they have that information, they have that experience. And most importantly, they have that experience as a common experience, especially if they watched the film together, if they read the script together, if they've seen that artwork together, if they have an exchange of emotions, if not only the rational talk. And the table read is exactly that. In an hour, in 2 hours, whatever the time of reading a script is, by setting parts, by involving everyone that's around, you're that character, you're that character, you're that character, everyone's reading. It's like a collective reading. You have the experience of everyone's taking part in the thing, and everyone is involved and respected, and everyone listens to one when they read a character and have an experience together. And this is the experience of watching the film when it's done, and doing the film, like filming it and playing the actors and the technicals and the direction and everything playing together in parallel. That is also an experience like this. So this is basically a premise laid as a foundation. This is how it's going to be, that we're going to collaborate, we're going to have this common experience. And I think what you're selling, and this is why it's different than the story, and this is why bad scripts can also persuade ensembles greatly, is because they can sell the experience apart from the story of collaborating. And at the end of it all, I think stories are for eternity, and only the great stories will last. But for our lifetime, it's even more worth it to have these collaborative experiences. And so,
Yes.
yeah, that's in support of the worst option in Istvan Szabo's saying, it's filmmaking for the sake of filmmaking. But no, I would defend it's also for a story, but it's for the story of the present, of being there and actively experiencing the story of collaboration together. And it's not the act of filmmaking, doesn't matter.
Mm.
It's
And to have something to reflect on afterwards anyway.
exactly. exactly. Because if it was only the craft of filmmaking, you wouldn't have it. It wouldn't be the experience. It wouldn't be something to reflect on. It would only be technicals. It would only be decisions revised afterwards. But that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we came to the end.
Yes.
So next time we're going to talk about the shooting and the editing. How do you plan for a shoot? How do you do a storyboarding? How do you do a shot list? How do you do logistics? How do you plan with the equipment and the people on the set and the actors and the crew? Especially if in a project there are parallel workshops and parallel other shootings and all that. So how you manage to plan something and make compromises and finally make those decisions that are forced decisions by time and by pointing guns and stakes for you, the filmmaker, and all the creative collaborators. And and after, I think shooting in itself is an episode. We can come to the conclusion with the editing and the premiering of a film, how the final decisions and the actual filmmaking, as they say for the editing, when you do the actual film that's going to be presented, when you make the actual decisions, where you can still decide to reshoot something and to cut out something entirely. And so that is a process and a discussion in itself. So I think there's definitely 2 more episodes in here.
We would say, well, to follow us on the platforms.
On our apps and platforms, but firstly on YouTube, where you can see this podcast, and then on near-balkan.com, where the ideas, your film drafts, if we manage to encourage you, or if you would have done it anyway, could be uploaded, could enter a competition with other filmmakers. So please, let's do something in this life that's gonna be worth it for real, and let's share our experiences, our stories, and do it
and support each other in producing these wonderful works of art.
Exactly. So thank you for watching. Hopefully we'll increment and exponentially add up in the future. See you then, and good luck until then. This was See Now Many.